first episode of season 3. So Maths Chat Live is a live stream with chatting maths, and it works because it's streaming on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn now. And we'd love this to be responsive. So if you're tuned in, wherever you're tuned in, do comment. I'll pick up the comments. I'm watching it on my control panel thing here. So make it interactive. Yeah, get involved. And so this is the first one of 2022. I'm very, very excited to have our guests with us. So we're looking at some of the earliest stage of mathematics learning. So we're going to go for a very quick round of introductions. So I'm Atul Rana, and I'm an online tutor teaching maths pretty much from the beginning stage to A-level maths. Over to you, Kieran.
Hi, I'm Kieran Mackle, a primary teacher and maths, specifically primary specialist.
And you also, I'll just give you a plug as well. You host Thinking Deeply About Primary Mathematics.
I'm terrible at plugging, sorry, Atul.
And the community, yeah. And Priya?
Hi, I'm Priya Shah, and my specialism is definitely maths, with experience of having taught primary school children and secondary school children too, here in England.
Finally, over to our host for today, Vikki, who's tuned in all the way from Canada.
I am. Hi. So I'm Vikki Priddle. I am coming to you all the way from Nova Scotia, which is on the east coast of Canada. We're in the middle of the worst winter ever. I teach primary. So I'm a math mentor. So I work with teachers and students from grades primary to about grade 5. And my job involves going around and working with teachers at all different schools and teaching different classes of students, all focused on math. So you'll hear math and maths, because I know there's a debate about which one's right, but I'm going with math today. So I'm happy to be here. I also have met a lot of the math community through the various math conferences from LaSalle. So I'm excited to be here. We're going to do some pretty cool work with Subitizing and Choral Counting.
Sounds great. Every time I hear Subitizing, I have that Jack Hartman song stuck in my head.
Yep. All right. Are we ready for me to share the screen, Atul?
Yeah, go for it.
Go?
We're using an interactive
We're going to jump right in?
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah.
So one of my new kind of things that I've been really focused on is I've been using a lot of Jamboard, because we've all been in this virtual world, and I do a lot of PD sessions with teachers, and one of the things that I've really missed is that interaction. And as much as you can have interaction on Zoom, as soon as you ask someone to share their thoughts, the microphones all go, the screens go, and it's crickets, like, but if you use a Jamboard and get people to share their thoughts, it's a lot less threatening and can be more comfortable. And it's the most user-friendly for children. So I work with very young children, and so I need something that's really user-friendly. So if you haven't explored Jamboard before, please do. It's really easy, really interactive, and we're going to do a little bit of work today around Subitizing. So we're going to start with Subitizing, and then we're going to move into choral counting. So the first thing I'm just going to ask you folks, when I say Subitizing, what kind of comes to your mind?
Well, I can go first. There's
all right.
It's an instant recognition of a set of objects. I suppose that's a perceptual Subitizing, and then there's a conceptual where you kind of group them up and then instantly recognize them as a set.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that instant recognition. Anything else come to mind for you folks, Kieran or Priya?
To me, it is literally that instant recognition, and I just associate it with numbers, irrespective of whether I see the objects. I just group them in numbers.
Yeah. How about you, Kieran?
For me, obviously Atol's covered and Priya have covered all the bases, but Clements and Sarama come to mind whenever I think about, and I'm thinking of the trajectories in particular. And then with young children myself, I'm thinking about, even though this is a really natural thing, I still have to guide my own children towards, when we're playing dice games and things, like we're playing Shut the Box, they'll automatically want to count 1-to-1. Well, hold on, guys, there must be a better way we could do this.
Right. And you're so right. One of the things that when I'm talking with a lot of teachers, and we assume that when a student rolls the die that they say 5, but we forget that they're still going 1, 2, they're still at that 1-to-1 kind of counting stage, right? So they talk about how, Subitizing can be one of the biggest factors in future number fluency, right? So it's got to be specifically taught, and we can't assume it. And like Atul mentioned, we've got the perceptual and the conceptual. So we're going to talk about that. But it's instantly recognizing stuff. So I want you to first just look at this image. This first set of images comes from the work of Steve Wyborny, who, if you haven't explored his work, please do. He is the creator of a gazillion Subitizing slides. He also does SD Mysteries and Splat. If his name has not crossed your math radar yet, go check it out. But if you look at this dot image, just take a moment, and you can either jot it on a sticky on the Jamboard, or maybe we'll just chat for this one. But tell me, what do you see?
I see I see 2 4s, but not quite with 2 4s. It's like an inter. So it's
okay.
Common.
So you're seeing 2 4s and then 1 in the middle that's common. Okay, I love it. How do you see it, Priya?
I see the ends, the L, upside down L on either end with something in the middle.
Nice. Kieran?
2 squares that are overlapping at one part, and so going for a shape similar to Atul, but 4 would be the sort of stuff I'm manipulating.
Right. So this gets us right into the idea of, perceptual subitizing. Usually you can recognize 1 to 4 objects instantly, but once you go beyond that 4, you get to the more conceptual, where you're starting to see things in groups. So these are some examples of how some people might have seen it, right? So thinking about this, sounds like Atul and Kieran, sounds like you were seeing this one. And Priya, is there one that looks similar to how you were seeing it, or totally different?
Yes, so the one on the bottom right, but the 3 that you've got, it's not the very bottom one that's on its own. I've flipped it the other way. So
you kind of...
one that's on its own is right in the middle.
Right. So when we're thinking conceptual subitizing, there's a whole bunch of different ways that we can group things together, and that leads to being able to partition numbers. And I firmly believe if you can partition numbers, you can do anything. It evolves and helps you with all your operations. So I thought we should do one together, because we're on Jamboard, and the whole point is for us to do stuff. So this image, obviously, I probably wouldn't show this one right away to students because it's quite large, but we're grown up, so I thought we'd do a little bit of an extra challenge. So this is our image that we're going to look at. And if you follow me onto frame 4, you'll see there are multiple copies of that image. So I just want you to take your pen, you can use stickies, however you want to show me, but how would you conceptually subitize this image? And you can pick any one. We'll soon see if we're overlapping. If I was doing this with students, I'd say, okay, I'd probably put their names right by it. I'd say, okay, Vikki, you're doing this one. Tool, you're doing this one, whatever. But I think we're fine.
Sounds good. I'll go with that.
And if you want to do more than one, you sure can.
did you want us to write the sum as well?
Sure, you don't have to, but it's nice too when you're doing it with students to see how it's partitioning, and the number isn't changing, it's how we're seeing the number is changing.
Amy Howe is with us. She's already saying, so excited to listen to Vikki, my mentor.
Oh, Amy, I'm so happy she's here. Amy and I have worked together since about 2005. We started out with classrooms next door to each other. And she terrified me when I tried to show a Disney movie once. I'm sure that'll make her laugh. So as you can see the screen, right, you can see just how many different ways that we could take one image. And it's not about saying to students, how many do you see? They're all seeing 15. The question that's most important is, how many do you see and how do you see it? Can you explain your thinking? And by using something like Jamboard, when I first asked you, there was a lot of hand movements. Atul was like, you know, doing the square, and Priya was like, well, it's like an L, and we were all kind of moving our heads trying to explain it, right? But once you have an interactive function, it makes it so much easier for us to explain our thoughts without tilting our heads and trying to justify how we saw it. We can easily come up and explain our thoughts. So this is just one kind of example of conceptual subitizing. They do say when you're working with subitizing to start out with you know, simple images like dots or X's, that kind of thing. And that generally children do better with arrays, so more rectangular, before you get into more irregular type patterns. So this one would be quite challenging for students. So starting with familiar arrangements, arrays, simple dots, maybe X's, something like that. Any thoughts or anything anybody want? I could talk forever. I just but anything anybody wants to share?
What would be the starting point, like the earliest? Because I often get I do intervention work with older pupils, and I've seen them quite literally just count the number of pips on the dice. So how would you develop that perceptual?
So starting with small numbers, like starting with quantities less than 4, and even talking to students about using your eyes to track, right? Because they start with the finger counting, and then you can get into things like, okay, use your eyes to kind of track, even if you're still going one by one, right? But getting them used to familiar arrangements, especially like dice patterns, because they're always standard dice and dominoes, right? They have the same pattern. And using quick images like using 10 frames, things that are predictable, so that they're doing it at a glance and not having to kind of break it apart as much. So I always do dice, dominoes, 10 frames, rec and rec, and Johnny has created on MathSpot and a whole new Subitizing thing that includes all of those different ones. So yeah, definitely start with familiar arrangements.
And I think it distinguishes sometimes between those children who've had a mathematically rich sort of 0 to 3, doesn't it? Because those die patterns and dominoes, if they're part of the things you do in the house all the time, you know, then you can come to school potentially with a sort of that already in place. But I think from what I've read, there's like a certain age that it typically develops. But I often we'll try in school to bring those board games in very early on where they've been absent, so that we can sort of try and address that. Because I think it's like you say, it's quick, it's a glance, it's something that you hopefully will be able to do innately. Yeah, totally with you.
I love the idea of games. The earlier you tend to play the games with the smaller numbers, I see how valuable it helps as the foundation to be built upon.
It is. You can really see it, like you said, Kieran, that, those students who come to school having played games, having looked at things, it's like we know students that have been read to, they know which way the book goes or the cover. Like it's the same kind of parallels of just having that real world kind of experience before they enter the classroom. But yeah, definitely start with things that are really familiar. All right. Are we okay to move on? Yeah. I got so much to talk about. I'm like, oh, I got to keep going. Okay. So the next one is, it's similar, but now we've changed it a little bit. So again, this comes from the work of Steve Wyborny. He calls these cube conversations. And it's not about how many do you see. It's about how do you see it. So we're just going to do this one quickly because it's just nice to see different varieties and to see we can go from dots to cubes. But just take a moment to show me how you see this one, and then we're going to look at something a little different connected to it.
This is so cool to watch. I'm gonna commit to my pen name.
It is fascinating, right? And it just gives you that insight, not about, I see 11 blocks. How do you see it? And being able to draw and manipulate. When I do this in classrooms, we are very lucky in our school board that we have smart boards in every classroom. So I often project this up, and students can come up and just kind of color in on the shapes right up front on the smart board. We're just very lucky that way. Love it. Okay. Are you going to be sad if I move you on? I'm just going to leave you go, because you're still conceptually subitizing and finding all kinds of different ways.
I'm liking that 5.5, 5.5 one.
I know. We're bumping it up.
Definitely didn't look at that one.
All right, I'm going to move us to the next frame if you're okay with that. So now we're still thinking about subitizing, conceptual subitizing, but now you can see we've added another layer. And so now you're thinking, oh, it's not just for our primary grade 1 students. Now we're starting to bump it up. So if you look at this cube conversation, now we've got a double layer. And if you go on Steve Wyborny's site, he's got tons of these. He's got ones with pieces missing. He's got triple thickness. He's got double thickness. But this now takes conceptual subitizing to another level, to a kind of a multiplicative thinking level. So take a look at this one and just jot your thought down. But I want to talk about this one. What did you see, and how do you think this could be used with students in the classroom? And if anybody's out there on Twitter and wants to share, go ahead, tell us what you think. So just take a moment on this one, but I really want to have a conversation about it.
Definitely. I think Amy's definitely on Twitter because she's commenting, so do write it out.
Oh, I love that. Right. So I always look at things like this when I'm doing stuff that's on screen, then how to take it off screen and get students' hands to be moving, right? Because students need to be manipulating things. I'm like a huge obsessive compulsive about manipulative. So seeing the blocks is exactly getting them to create their own structures and getting them to build it in different parts. You can see how then it can become about not just what do you see, but how could you manipulate those objects? How could you move the blocks around? Absolutely. So what are some of your thoughts as we kind of looked at this bumping it up a little bit? What are some thoughts going through your mind?
I love the idea of literally having the multiplicative expansion, literally, because you've got the front. I saw it literally as the front face, and then I just grew in depth. So in my head, I was thinking, oh, connecting it to volume, I'm connecting it to lots of dimensions in visual perception.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just kind of a next level, right? Like we've started with our, familiar dot arrangements. We've gone to our conceptual subitizing, and now we've kind of bumped it up even more and taken our subitizing skills, but added another layer.
Yeah, for me, it's, I had like two visions straight away as, I suppose, someone who does more secondary. One is prisms, which come up so regularly, volume of prism, and the other one is, it's basically looking at the distributive property in 3 dimensions. I've never seen it this way, actually. I've always done it with Cuisenaires in 2 dimensions. But, yeah, it's very cool to see it like this as well.
I really like the way you can't see part of the sort of the shape of the edifice, because I think there's definitely something to be said for if something's too tactile, then it can be hard to abstract. And I'm thinking about it and thinking this is almost forcing the children into that bit between manipulation and abstract thought. So I really like that, and definitely will be taking this back into the classroom.
And it takes away, like, originally we talked about that 1-to-1. They can't count this 1 by 1, right? We've stretched them that they can count the front face by 1, but then what are they going to do? Because then they might have to hold the larger number in their head and count on, or depending on the stage, they might be able to double it or use multiplication, right? So we've kind of changed the game for the 1-to-1 counting. Yeah. So this is the work of Steve Wyborny, one of the most generous mathematicians out there who shares so much work for free for everybody. So I always like to give him a little plug when I can, because he's got a lot of great stuff.
And we can share these resources on. I'll put that on this thread with the live stream so that people can use them. It's really, really good, and I've never seen it before.
All right. So, and that's the other part I like too, is when we talk about subitizing, people think about little kids, right? We think about those really, really young learners, and yet it's not just something that, in my level, that people think about it in primary and 1. It can be at grade 2, 3, 4, right? And beyond, depending on how you structure it, because once you get beyond the perceptual, seeing those 1 to 4 objects like that, then the conceptual is really, it's subitizing, but it's about partitioning, right? Composing and decomposing numbers. That's really what's happening. All right. Do you want to play a game? I think we should play a game. We talked about games. So unfortunately, with Jamboard, you can't roll a die. You can get a Google extension and roll a die that way, or you can do on YouTube, just dice roller, that kind of thing. But because I wanted to keep it all within Jamboard, and especially when I'm working with younger students, I don't want them bipping between different tabs, and sometimes I can't get the right extension on the Chromebook. So came up with like a Jamboard hack that most people kind of use. So let's pick a color. I'm going to pick pink.
Okay.
I'll go
What
green.
colors do you want to be? Atul's going green.
I'm going blue.
Okay.
Yellow then.
Okay, so this game is really simple, but you think about the big ideas that we're trying to accomplish is we're trying to match numerals with dot patterns. So there's a lot of play here for young students, being able to match a written numeral with a dot pattern and being able to conceptually subitize. So there's so many big ideas in what seems like such a simple game. So we're trying to play 4 in a row. You need to select the arrow, so we're not using our pen anymore. And all we're going to do is we're just going to delete that top one. This tells me my first number is 4, and I'm going to look, I'm trying to get 4 in a row on my game board, and I'm going to just simply cover my 4. And if I was working with students playing this, I'd say, well, how do you know that's 4? And they might, this one, they'll probably just say to me, it's like a dice. It's like a die pattern. I can tell it's 4. Or they might tell me that it's 2 and 2. Okay. And if we're doing this in real life, we'd take turns. We'd be talking about it each kind of step of the way. But you get the idea that the big ideas are simply, and once you're done with your numeral, you can just delete it, and then you get another one. So I play this game usually whole class up at the front with smartboard, and then I can just put my dice in and we can roll. Sometimes I play against the class. I've used it as a learning station when after we've played it, it's something students can do independently. So when I'm looking for 6, this is when they start to get a little, they're like, well, there isn't a 6. And I'll say, well, how do you know there isn't a 6? Right? So they'll say, well, I looked at that and it's 5. So because we're using a die from 1 to 6, or in this case, stickies, I still put the 6 because it forces students to look at a lot of the different combinations, right? So there is no 6. I'm losing this game because I'm talking too much.
Oh, that's fine. I was still looking for that 6, so now I'm glad.
I know, right?
Pattern spotting.
I'm totally losing this game. I keep getting 6s. Yay.
It's a very clever hack, actually. Instead of using dice, I've got real dice. I could roll them.
Right? All it is you're just putting your stickies just randomly one on top of the other, but it just keeps everything housed in one space. And especially when we're working with our younger learners, the more we can keep them in one space, the easier it is. So, who's green? Attila, you just blocked me. Kieran's already won anyway. So, really simple game. And taking any game that you play in real life, it's so easy to convert it into Jamboard, right? All you need is the image of the game board. Set that as your background, and then you're just creating counters and finding a substitute for your dice. The other way is at the bottom. You can do it where if you have 2 students playing, you can get them to just kind of move their piece to a numeral so they have a bit more control. So that can change the game from a game of, you can add a little bit more strategy, right? So, but you can't place it on the same spot as another person. So it gives them a bit more control, and then it kind of forces them to scan the board even more of, oh, where do I want to go next, right? So if I'm playing, and I'm just losing miserably, but I want to be on the 3, put mine on the 3, so I can easily try and grab that spot. So a couple different ways you can structure it. With a bit more randomness and strategy, or just a little bit more strategy too. But yeah, converting any game into a Jamboard game is just as simple as setting it as your background and adding some counters and some way to choose numbers.
Oh, it's just fantastic. It's the sort of vision I had for Match Chat Live when I first got it underway, because I've been doing this on a one-on-one board, where, because Amy said, you can, when we're annotating, you can get an insight into the thoughts, because we're thinking out aloud. We might not be articulating it on Zoom, but as actually you can see it through. You can get a real good insight into the thinking through that movement, that virtual movement, the cursor movement.
Mm-hmm. One of the things, I said it earlier, that I like is it allows for everybody to participate, even if they're not your hand raisers, right? That, and especially I find in math, a lot of students are often shy, because if we do that hand raising thing, they see, oh, so and so's got the answer, I can't keep up. But it allows for people to be able to take their own pace a little bit better, which I think is really important, especially in math, that it's not about speed. And it also just helps, it gives people time to think without everybody watching that they're thinking, right?
Would you use this in the classroom, or is it just on a virtual, when you're doing virtual?
So I have done it a couple different ways. In the classroom, if I'm using Jamboard, I would do it in Google Classroom, but I would never have the whole class on one Jamboard. Like I said, that is chaos. But you can do it where you could assign a Jamboard and have 2 students on the same Jamboard, so they're playing if they're using Chromebooks in the classroom. Something like this, I would probably be doing a whole class with the smartboard as a demo, and then having them go off with paper and dice kind of thing. But I mean, we've all had to quickly move to virtual, so it's nice to have the option of both, so that, should that happen, we're also trained now that we have other options to allow for collaboration for students, even if they're not in the same space. Yeah.
I can see this taking over in the 5 minutes time that you have in primary, or the 2 minutes time that you have with 2 children already on a laminated sheet and just playing. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and that's it. Once you've established the game, then it's a matter of, then it's independent, and it's just review and practice, right? It's that reinforcement of the skill. All right. Are you okay to keep going? Tell me if I'm just flying through, because I just get excited. Oh, okay. So hopefully you're with me on frame 8. Ethel's like, what? So this was actually, there are tons of these you can find online. And one of my fellow math mentors, Amy, not Amy Howe, a different Amy, she, when we moved to virtual, she created a bunch of mystery Jamboards to do with number and patterns and shapes. And I thought about how much I loved these mystery Jamboards and how students really loved using them because they were fun. And I was trying to think about how I could use her inspiration to use it for Subitizing, just because I love them. So this is just a mystery Jamboard. It's nothing exciting, but I'll tell you, students go bananas for it. They're like, so for this one, I'm just going to ask you to find all the images that show 7, and you drag them into the circle. So I'll start and show you. So as we move the flashlight, oh, I found an image, and now I'm going to look and I'm going to Subitize it. I see that that is 6, and I see that it is 1, and I'm going to drag it into my circle. So for something like this is definitely more whole class, one person coming up at a time, or if you're virtual, maybe with 2 students or just you and 1 student one-on-one. This wouldn't work well with a big group of people, but I had to show it because I just love using these with students, and I figured it could work with Subitizing. So if either of you or any of you want to kind of take control, don't fight over the flashlight or torch, I think. I gotta remember all my British words now. Yeah, and see if you can find an image that shows 7. I just love your smile. It's just like when the kids see it, they're like, ooh.
Yeah, I've got my hands up, so I'll let someone else.
Are you happy for me to go? Are you happy for me to try this?
Yeah, go for it.
Yes.
Right, so I've got to drag the...
Yeah, so you're going to drag your flashlight around. If you kind of click on it.
Yeah.
There you go. And oh, you're finding some. Now you're going to look and see, is it 7? You would tell us, how do you know? How do you know that it's 7?
Oh. So I think it's because I see the 5. Shall I circle on it?
You can.
I'm going to try. Here we go. So I see the 5 and a 1 and another 1. 5 add 1 is 6, add 1 is 7.
Nice.
So I'm going to go searching again.
Sure.
Oh, no, that doesn't look like a 7.
Right, and then you can have conversations with students like, well, you're saying it doesn't look like a 7. Can you tell me why? Why is it not a 7? And so it's not about, it's about the conversation about what are we seeing.
So here I'm definitely not seeing 7. I'm seeing 2 lots of 4s, which is an 8, and 1 more, which is 9. So I'm going to carry on searching. Oh, what have I got here? Oh, I think I have a 7. Let's just move it, and I'm going to double check. I have a 4 and a 3. 4 and 3 is definitely 7. Kieran, you want to take over from me now?
Yeah, I can have a go. So let's see, let's move this around. Yeah, so there we got a 4 and a 3, or a 3 and a 4. Let's highlight that. 3, 4. Do you want to turn that, Phil?
Why not? It's Saturday night. No, on that one. Ooh. That's a 4 and 3. Yeah, I'll let someone else.
So just another way, we're still looking at Subitizing. It's still the same skill, right? We're trying to think about 7. We're looking for different combinations. We're just trying to kind of gamify it a little bit, right? Any thoughts, any questions?
No, I really like the fact that if you've got one person who is moving the torch, everybody else is still looking, they're still engaging.
Right.
And they're trying to even look for that 7 themselves before you even blur it out. You know, I found myself doing that whilst Kieran and Atul are looking for it. So it does get your mind thinking about it. So even though there's one person making all the movements, everybody else is interacting in their mind, which is fantastic.
Yeah. It really is. It's just about engagement, right? We're just trying to find different ways to engage students and to look at Subitizing and being flexible with numbers in lots of different ways, right? But just, and I love how you said that, Priya, because you're like, oh, is he going to get one? Is he going to get one? Right? So you're still tuning in, and as you're thinking about, is he going to get one, you're looking at the image and saying, nope, that's not one. So everybody's participating, even if there is just one person kind of taking the lead.
I find it very easy to get stuck using the same activities, you know, and then there'll be ones that I've used in the past. Oh, I've forgotten all about those. And looking at the different ones you've got us sort of exploring tonight, I'm thinking about, well, what do they all have in common? So then I can think about what I can design in the future. I think it's really, really interesting, and Yeah, because like you said, even though these activities are reasonably different, they all share a certain theme, don't they?
Yeah. And it is that, I mean, I know for here in Nova Scotia, grade primary, we have a mental math curriculum, and really the only mental math on it is Subitizing, and in grade primary, students only work with the numbers 0 to 10. So primary teachers are always trying to think of different ways to do the same thing, because you have to explore Subitizing, but it can't always be rolling a die and comparing. It can't always be looking at dominoes. You've got to find lots of different avenues to explore the same concept, because you've got to go deep, right? Kieran, you got to think deeply and explore it, but just in lots of different ways. And that's I think the biggest challenge, especially for lower elementary teachers, is that your content may be narrow, but you have to go deeper within your content to explore it.
And
sorry for jumping in, Atul. Does that narrow content go the whole way across what we would call the primary phase? Like, how do you
Not
feel about
really.
the distribution of mathematics?
No, I would say really our grade primary and grade 1 have a much more, so grade primary goes numbers 0 to 10, and they just explore those numbers, partitioning, counting, etc. And then our grade 1s go 0 to 20, and I feel that that's really narrow, and it enables people to go really deeply on and how to work with those numbers. But then it starts probably similar to what you see. Then we start adding in addition and subtraction, and then grade 3 with fractions and 4 and decimals, and then it just starts, the pace kind of picks up. But I feel that our primary and grade 1 really are a nice narrow, enable people to go deeply.
Yeah, I was considering moving to Canada for a second there. I thought, oh, there's a great curriculum in place.
Yeah, and we do have a wonderful one, but it really, those 2 grade levels, I think they've nailed it. Just get at the heart of exploring things in depth, and then it does start to pick up more. Yeah.
Because they are, well, they're forward facing, isn't it? That the prism task you had. At some point, they will see prisms, and see this also at secondary, where you can see pictures of these prisms, and a lot of them can't see them from different viewpoints and projections. This is like kind of stereo imaging thing, but you're presumably using the real things and this kind of image there, which goes up with the distributive property, multiplying out. So very forward-facing ideas. And then that's pretty much distributive properties, that multiplying out with brackets and things, but using blocks.
Yeah. All right. Do we want to play another game? Are you gamed out? I'm keeping you going. Yeah. So this one, again, can be done. You can take any game and just make it interactive on Jamboard. There's nothing here that I wouldn't do in a class with a piece of paper. So for this one, it's just roll, subitize, count, and circle. We're just going to need a die. Of course, we don't have a die, so we're just going to delete our stickies. I just made 1 pile of stickies here instead of 4. I just thought it'd be easier to take turns. And you're just going to get yourself a number, quickly subitize that, and of course we're encouraging our students to do it at a glance if they can. If we were doing it in real life, shout out the number, and then counting and circling that many dots on your paper. And so you can see I chose 2 centimeter dot paper, but as students get more control with fine motor, you could go to 1 centimeter dot paper. You could vary it and use triangular dot paper. You could use grid paper, right? The idea is still the same. We're looking at a numeral. We're trying to, if we had a die, be even better, because then we're subitizing the dot pattern. But in this case, we're going to look at our numeral really quickly and then circle our dots. So I'm going to get rid of our instructions. Hopefully you'll remember. And I'm just going to delete a sticky. I've got 4. So I'm going to get my pen and just put my initials in. And so then the next person just has to, I can even do it there, delete the sticky. and off you go. And then we decide who is going to get more dots.
So are we expected here to mark anywhere, or does it have to be following through in some sort of pattern next to yours?
So you can do it anywhere, and that gets really interesting because you can have conversations with students about, you know, if they're leaving one dot really isolated, then it's going to be really hard to get that one. So you get into those conversations about how are we going to be filling the paper, right? So you start to strategize about how you're going to place your dots, or how you're going to, as we get going, how I can really kind of mess up, you know, a tool, and I can do my dots in a different way. So, yeah.
So I'm obviously going to do this really random.
Love it.
I'll go next then. Roll the die.
And it activates kind of that spatial awareness too. Like now we're looking 3 and thinking, oh, it's kind of like an L on here, or that 4, it's a square. So we're connecting the spatial with the number sense piece.
Chaos, asshole. What are you doing? It's hard to delete this. 5.
Oh, it's a bit more interesting.
I'll fix that for you. There we go.
Okay. And so you see, we could go on and on. I'm going to start to be one of those kids, and I'm going to put mine right there. So now nobody can really make a big shape right there. So you see how I you can start to strategize a little bit. If you're doing it with, you know, a little older students, they will start to get that kind of competitive edge with each other, which is not a bad thing, because they're talking and being competitive about numbers and math.
I'm going with the L theme.
Nice.
All right, I'll roll away. Oh, that's convenient because I can. I'll change my pen. Going for the Kieran highlighter style.
Vikki, do you reckon that all games lend themselves to like layered mathematics? You know, like in this one where you can start really simple, or is it it's just about seeing the maths, or do you think some games are better suited than others?
If I'm looking for a game to use in the classroom, or any activity, I always ask myself the question: is it one and done? So is it something that you can just play once and then you're like, I'm done, and you can't go anywhere else with it? And I try to look at how easily I can differentiate it. So, because we always have a huge spread in our class, and if a task is easy for me to differentiate, either by giving a different kind of die, a 10-sided die, or just changing the kind of grid paper, like I look for games that can lend themselves to a wider range. And if it can't, I'm just not one of those teachers that I don't have time to cut and laminate a beautiful Pinterest-worthy puzzle where you match, because once you've matched it, you're done, right? So I always look for games that are really open-ended, and they can never be one and done, and they'll be different every time you play it.
One and done. I love that. I'm going to use that as well.
Yeah,
I do. That's what I say. I always, if you're going to invest your time, if it's one and done, is it worth sitting there on Saturday night with your scissors and your laminated puzzle pieces I mean, we've all done it because they look cute and they're very Pinterest worthy, but then what do you do? It's done, right? And who's got time for that?
Enough t-shirts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm looking at my time and I'm thinking, oh my goodness.
Sorry, Vikki, before you move on,
Yeah.
Can I ask you, would you recommend using the isometric dots instead?
Absolutely. I think you could try both. Using isometric grid paper would give you a very different way of looking at your numbers, right? Of subitizing. You'd get different spatial orientations. So yeah, changing your isometric dot paper, square dot paper, grid paper, triangular dot paper. Yeah, I would try all different kinds. Okay. I'm looking at my time and I feel like we need to skip to choral counting. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go. For
Okay. And and it's so funny because you think, oh, subitizing, how much can you talk about? What do you see? I see 5. Okay. But there's so much to it, right? It's insane. It's all about not how many do you see, how do you see it? It's not about the number. It's about how you see it. So I'm going to skip us ahead. We were going to do some which one doesn't belong with dot patterns. One of the articles I read as I just kind of skipped to this frame 13 just to chat quickly, talked about when we're working with subitizing to try to start with not real images, to start with kind of dot patterns or X's or something that's very simple. But as you get kind of higher up and students are more flexible with that conceptual subitizing, that, you know, real images can be engaging. I use a lot of real images, definitely with grade 3 and up, but I tend to stick to more conventional dot type images for younger learners. So I just wanted to point that out. Oh, we were going to play Dinos in a Cave too. Okay. Okay. So choral counting, this comes from the work of Megan, Frankie, Kazemi, and Turo. Don't know if I'm pronouncing them right, but this book has changed my life. It is called Choral Counting and Counting Collections. Counting Collections is a whole other Maths Chat Live and is something I'm really passionate about. But when you look down here, I just want you to put your name or however you want to show me, but never heard of it, it's brand new to you, think you've heard of it, but you're not really sure, or you do it with students regularly. So I've got a kind of continuum here. Where would you put yourself? Okay. So when I think of choral counting, I put that picture of a camera there to remind me that what we're going to talk about today is really a really small snapshot. But if you are watching this and you say, oh my gosh, that looks really cool, go and get this book. It's a really easy read. It's one that's really practical. You can pick it up, head into school on Monday, and use some of the activities. But choral counting to me is like skip counting, but I always think of Buzz Lightyear, to infinity and beyond. So I always use that image. It's exactly what I picture in my head. So there are lots of big ideas. I try to focus on big ideas because, kind of like we chatted a bit earlier, Kieran, our curriculum too has lots, once we get up in the grades, there's so many little indicators that you're just like boom, 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 and you've got to focus on the big ideas. Otherwise, you can't do everything individually. They're not discrete. Math is bigger, right? So the big ideas of choral counting for me is it's about looking for patterns. It's about justifying, it's about reasoning, and it's about big ideas with number. So place value, it's about partitioning, it's about patterns. And it really brings out all of those big pieces. So the first thing I'll start with is a very typical way to start people thinking. What do you notice? What do you wonder? I want you to look at this image. This is a choral count, and you can just use a color-coded sticky and tell me some things that you notice, you wonder, or what it makes you think of. And if you search the hashtag choral counting on Twitter, you will find a gazillion images such as this. There are many amazing educators doing it all across the world. So this is kind of an example of a typical choral count. So we're seeing that, yeah, the thoughts being captured around the outside, that's the most critical part of this. It's not about the skip counting. That's where Buzz Lightyear comes in, right? It's not just the skip counting, it's the to infinity and beyond. Where can we take it? And so it's all about the patterns. It can absolutely be applied to any number, and there are many examples out there for people doing it with fractions, with decimals, numbers in the thousands. It's not about just skip counting by 2s or 5s or 10s. And the book gives great examples for all different grade levels. When I show this image a lot to various teachers, one of the first things they'll say is, well, it says skip count by 2s, and inevitably somebody will say, but it's going by 10. Because we're so trained that when we're recording counting, we do it left to right like we do when we're recording writing. And so one of the biggest parts with choral counting is planning ahead for your count, how you're going to record it. Are you going to record it vertically or horizontally? And where are you going to stop? Because we'll do a couple of examples so that it makes a difference in what you see. So they talk about making sure to plan ahead for your count. What numbers are you going to start at? And are you going to go vertically, horizontally? And how many horizontally or vertically? So the biggest part is about, it's a multi-day routine. The first part is obviously getting the count out. It's having the students count 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, and recording that count in the way that you plan to. But that's just the very beginning. And so, the words choral counting come from, as we're counting, we're doing it chorally as a class so that everyone can participate. But then it goes so much more beyond that. And that's where the magic happens. So, just another example, if you look at this count, how it's recorded horizontally, going by 10s, looking at various patterns, allows for people to look at things that we might not even notice, that going here on the diagonal is adding 100. You hear things from students that you're like, oh, whoa, I would never have even noticed that. So let's do one. So one of the things that is really great. There is also a Google Slides version created by the incredible Teresa Wills. If you haven't explored her work with interactive Google Slides, she has the most phenomenal Google Slides choral counting template. And that was kind of, I used that as my inspiration for Jamboard. And so Teresa Wills is the Google Slides queen, and she has a gazillion different templates for various math routines. So this is a choral count. It's off decade by tens. So that's one of the things that we talk about is when we skip count by tens, why do we have to go 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, right? We can change the starting number. And so this one is recorded horizontally. So I want you to take a moment to just play around on the Jamboard. You can do a couple things. If you notice a pattern that you want to talk about, I might want to talk about this pattern, that it's going up by 10. That's quite obvious, but you know, you get the idea. Maybe I want to just make it a little bit more transparent so I can see still, whatever. But I want you to just use the Jamboard, use the pen, use the arrows, etc. to tell me what patterns do you see. And so we could play forever and ever. But when we're doing this with students, we're kind of trying to capture their thoughts. We probably wouldn't do this much in one session. We might just do a couple and then stop. But if I was to ask somebody, whoever placed this green arrow going diagonally from the 276 pointing up to the 116, can you tell me about that pattern and why you chose to highlight that?
Yeah, that was me. It's hard to see now, but I think it's decreasing in 40s as you go up towards the top. And what I was really interested to see is where would that next green, so next square be when we go, you know, do I need to be 2 removed from that one? And then so I was trying to work out.
Right.
Yeah, thinking outside the grid that we've got. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Does anybody want to share one of something that you highlighted is with an arrow or a circle and just tell us about what you noticed, what pattern you were seeing?
Well, I've got the yellow ones there. There's 36, 136, 236. So it's a nice bit of, yeah, going up in hundreds, obviously, but it links up to the place value as well.
Exactly, and seeing that we're repeating. We're not just suddenly changing numbers, right? Absolutely. Priya, anything you wanted to share about what you put on?
Yes. So the yellow diagonal. When I saw it, I can't see the numbers now. Should I get rid of the arrow?
No, I can just make it transparent for you.
Brilliant. Thank you. So when I looked at it, I was like 60, and straight away in my head it related to time. So I was just like 60 seconds. Cool. I was just going up in 60s.
Nice.
So every hour, but yet we're talking about minutes. So
right. So making that connection to time, noticing things. I mean, when you do this with students, most things that you'll hear would be, well, they all end in 6. Oh, well, why, right? Why do we think that is? So it's the idea of when we're skip counting by 10 traditionally, they all end in 0. Noticing things that it's going up by 10, and then we start investigating those other patterns, going up by 60, decreasing by 40. And so that's kind of, your first day is getting the count out, looking for patterns. This would probably be spread over a couple of days so that you can capture all the different thoughts, like you're revisiting the same count. And one of the things that you can do then is start covering numbers. And I'll say, well, what number is under my blue circle? Someone will say, well, it's 166. Well, how do you know? I know because it ends in a 6. I used looking vertically by adding 50, or I used the 156 and added on that way. So then it's about covering up numbers and kind of like Kieran was saying, making predictions, right? So if this, you can even do it different ways where I can put a circle underneath and then say, okay, what number would come below this 316, right? So what would come next, extending the count. So it's about not just the count, it's about the patterns and what you see. Let's do one more. So one of the things that I talked about earlier was planning ahead for your count and planning ahead where you're going to stop. So if I'm going to do 4s and I'm going to do it vertically, so I've already kind of made my notes here that I'm going to stop at 20. And I would be chorally counting with students. And we would all be doing this together. So if we look at that, and now we start thinking about, well, what patterns do we see? We could go on and on and on and on, right? But noticing that, oh, we've got the 4. These are all ending in 4. These are all ending in 1 in the 8. Like, it made it much easier for me to do the count without thinking because that pattern was there. But if I change that count, so I chose to do it vertically and I chose to stop at 20 so that kids could easily see these patterns in the ones place. But the minute I change the count, it changes the patterns that I see. So I'm just going to quickly do that. So now I'm going to change my count to stop at 24. So now when we look at it, we look at our count, we don't as easily see that pattern of the ones across or the 20, 40, 60, right? We look across and now we're starting to see things on the diagonals, right? So how you plan your count and how you record your count will really drastically change the patterns that you see. And this is where I made my error right here. I'm like, what have I done wrong? It's quite hard to do this. But do you see how suddenly it...
I was still just...
Now the patterns are totally different. Yeah.
I was just still in awe of how incredible it is by making that small tweak of how the whole thing changes. That is incredible.
It really does change. Like when I did the first count stopping at 20, it was really quick and easy for me to fill it in because I knew it ended in 6, ended in 0. And then you saw here I even made an error because I'm trying to do it and talk and blah, right? But just that planning ahead for what is your count going to look like really changes the patterns that students see. So it can be done. I've seen it done, and I have a various slideshows, but I've seen it. There's so many examples doing it with decimals, doing it with fractions. other things to think about are not just about vertical or horizontal, but even starting your count at different places, right? And so instead of going top to bottom, going bottom to top, and then we get talking about, you know, even when you think about the hundreds chart and the flipped upside down hundreds chart, movement is magnitude. That can change the game too. So planning ahead for your count makes a big difference. It can be done with decimals, fractions. I've seen it done with money. I've seen people do it into the thousands. It's about how you're going to record it and where you're going to start, because counting by fives at 13 is very different than counting by fives starting at 5. So that's choral counting in the very briefest snapshot.
Sorry, Vikki, can I ask you, would you always recommend the 6x5 grid? No, I just chose to put that on here because, well, I was kind of being lazy a little bit and just wanted to keep the Jamboard. No, I've seen some choral counts being done just 2 rows going across 3x3. There's no set standard for how many squares you would use. No. And I've done it many different ways. I'm looking at a couple of examples on my other screen, and I'm seeing one that's like a 10x3. The grid is not, it's not limited. It's just about, as you plan it out, you know, always try to, and the book gives really great examples of different suggestions, but yeah, so it's plan it, how you're going to record it ahead of time, and it will drastically change what students see. Anyway, that's my choral counting.
Oh, it's beautiful. It's
in a nutshell.
There's so much stuff that in secondary you do with arithmetic series, potentially really with the nth term, but this is just a whole new way of looking at an arithmetic series in this kind of choral counting pattern, and yeah, there's loads in it. I'm just thinking of how I could use it to link it up to arithmetic series and nth term things as well, and they can come up with a generalized formula looking at it in one direction in a diagonal, or skip counting. Yeah.
If you search, you just search the hashtag choral counting. There are I don't do secondary, so I look at a lot of that stuff and think, I don't know, but I see a lot of like algebra type stuff, and so you will find examples that you'll be, what? It will make sense to you. It doesn't make sense to me, but it's not limited to traditional skip counting. Yeah. I think that's my big thing for today. I don't know. I mean, I could go on and on and on, but what are we thinking? Are we having questions? Do we have thoughts?
We could have done probably 2 hours on Subitizing alone, let alone that choral counting. So we'll have to get you back into a whole bunch of these different ones now that we know how the Jamboard works, and that there's this interactivity on Jamboard and on Twitter as well. If you have any thoughts on Twitter, do also post as a reply to the video tweet. Yeah.
And we can post some of the links, like some of the people I mentioned, right, Atul, on the feed. We can kind of link to those resources. That'd be awesome. Then people can go and explore some more.
Yeah, the video remains there as a recording on YouTube and Twitter, so just remains there as a reference. On the YouTube one, I can also add in the links that you put in the reply on the Twitter thread.
Awesome.
Yeah, we did a similar one with Quiz and Error odds with Simon Gregg as well, and he just replied with loads of amazing resources in that one thread. So
whenever we were talking about the LaSalle videos and tutor earlier on, I did some of the counting stuff, and I had bottom to top 100 square looking at the traditional patterns, and I think on most of them I was able to go, oh yeah, and you know, so it helps if we look for this, helps if we look for that. I think it was any number counting eights. I was all, sorry guys, you're on your own, so I'm gonna have to go back and run that with this to see if there are, because I think you can almost get any sort of combination of numbers if you count for long enough. You know, there's no way that, you know, like with the twos, well, you're going to have a 2, 4, 6, or you're going to have a 1, a 3, and a 5, etc. So it'd be really interesting to run through this to see if there's anything I can find that might actually help in that situation, because Yeah, well, I was like, you just have to count them, guys, and memorize this stuff.
Yeah, and it's such a small tweak that, just a simple change of your recording or your starting number can change so much. And it amazed me when I first started exploring it, that it was something so simple that I just hadn't thought about. And so I love things that are simple. And again, it's not one and done. You can do this a gazillion times and never be done. Yeah.
How much time would you dedicate to it in the classroom? Like, what would it look like in practice?
I would do maybe 5 to 8 minutes max in a session, and spread it, like the same count would probably usually last like a week, like at least 4 days, because you start with the count and a few patterns, but it shouldn't be a big long thing. It's about getting the count, getting the patterns, revisiting, and then doing those predictions and cover-ups and things. So it's kind of a multi-day routine. Yeah.
It's brilliant. It's another one of those 5-minute things, and it's making all those connections for maths. Fantastic. I love it.
Me too.
Yeah. It's real sort of mathematical thinking, isn't it? It's like spotting a pattern, conjecturing if it'll work or not, generalizing. It's all the things we want our pupils to become mathematical, isn't it? So maths is so much about patterns and pattern spotting. And it's all encapsulated in this really... I mean, I was there, and when you asked for familiarity with this thing, I was there like on the left, not fairly unfamiliar with it, but I am all out to run with this and see what comes of it. I'll put that on Twitter and see what similar activities are. See if I can do one in binary or some other bases and see what crazy stuff that throws up.
I was going to say, I'm sure you'll do a multi-base one.
Yeah, ones and zeros in binary, so see where that goes.
Yeah. Awesome.
Brilliant. So I promised everyone that we'll limit it to about this time. So fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Thanks so much for your time, Vikki, especially, and our panelists as well. I know it's a Saturday evening for giving up your time. As I said, this recording will be up on all those channels, so you can just rewind, review, and this is not just a live conversation, so if anything comes up, just reply to that tweet. I'm sure we'd be delighted to keep the conversation going. Yeah, I'll sign off there, and
all right.
I will hit the stop streaming button, and then we'll have a very quick sort of debrief and we can finish up. So
awesome.
Thank you everyone, and thank you everyone who's tuned in as well.
Thanks.
Thank you.